As much as I didn't want to admit it, I knew exactly what I'd done. This wasn't just a separation. I'd separated my left shoulder in 2004, so I knew what it felt like. This was something with much graver implications. I was in absolute shock. I stood in the end zone looking up, but not seeing anything. I glanced into the stands and tried to focus, but a million thoughts raced through my mind. I didn't need to hear it from a doctor. Deep down, I sensed how serious this was. I started for the sidelines, and all of a sudden, I became sick to my stomach. This may be the last time I'll ever wear a Chargers uniform. Fear rose up. Maybe this is the last time I'll ever wear a football uniform. This could be the end of my career. The feeling was real. I could taste it. And it was terrifying. This paragraph is from the book we're going to talk about today, Coming Back Stronger, by Drew Brees and Chris Fabry.
Welcome to Performers, the podcast that takes you inside the minds of the world's most extraordinary athletes, coaches, and performers. We're your host. I'm Dr. Duncan Simpson, and you've just heard from Dr. Greg Young. And as sports psychology experts, we'll guide you through the pages of their autobiographies, revealing the mindset, strategies, and habits that propelled the world's best to the pinnacle of their fields. So, Greg, why this book? It's our first team sport athlete.
It is indeed. For those people that are familiar with Drew Brees, it's a no-brainer. It makes perfect sense. You'll know about him. But for those who maybe don't know his background, I have that insight. Drew Brees, an NFL quarterback for 20 seasons, and was a member of the New Orleans Saints for most of his career. He's second in career passing yards, career touchdown passes, career pass attempts, career pass completions, and career completion percentage, which is a lot. Yeah. He also holds the record for consecutive games with a touchdown pass break, and the world record held by Johnny Unitas for 52 years. That's a really long time. From 2006 to 2020, Drew Brees led the Saints to 9 playoff appearances, 7 division titles, including 4 consecutive ones from 2017 to 2020, 3 NFC Championship game appearances, and the franchise's Super Bowl title in 2010, earning him the game's MVP award. After playing for 15 seasons with New Orleans, Brees extended his total Pro Bowl selections to 13 and was twice named Defensive Player of the Year. Also led the NFL in passing yards, a record 7 times. He's regarded as one of the greatest quarterbacks of all time. And not only that, but off the field, he's also done great philanthropic work throughout his career, particularly in the New Orleans area post-Hurricane Katrina. Honestly, what Drew Brees means to the city of New Orleans cannot be overstated. So really excited to dive in with his story today. So where we'll start is the very beginning. That's really always a good place to get kicked off. So Drew Brees' parents both had really athletic backgrounds. His father played basketball at Texas A&M, and his mother was a former All-State athlete in 3 different sports in high school. His maternal uncle, Marty Atkins, was an All-American starting quarterback for the University of Texas Longhorns college football team from 1972 to 1975, and his maternal grandfather, Ray Atkins, had the 3rd most victories as a Texas high school football coach in his 3 decades at Gregory Portland High School. His younger brother Reed was an outfielder for the Baylor Bears baseball team, which made the 2005 College World Series. So I think it's pretty safe to say that he's come from a solid pedigree.
It's a sporting family from his grandmother, grandfather. He's been around sports, both baseball and football growing up.
So he actually gets a little bit of a late start into the football world, which when you reflect back on those accolades that I listed off at the beginning, probably seems a little bit contrarian. But getting into that football experience, he says, they say you need 3 skills to be a great quarterback: toughness, intelligence, and heart. Although I didn't officially start training to become a quarterback until I was in high school, in a way, I guess God had been preparing me for that role all my life. So we're used to, at times, people starting this journey really, really early and specializing in. Does anything stand out to you in terms of, maybe getting that late start into a sport, but potentially having a slightly different background leading up to it?
It's really interesting when we see these kind of late bloomers. It's not super unusual. In certain sports, you'll get some athletes that will go into their sport later in life. We've recently heard from a tennis player and a skier in Agassi and Lindsey Vonn that started very early. I think Agassi was around 3 or 4 and Lindsey Vonn was 2.5, and we have the opposite here. We have what we call a late starter, but he's developed certain skills out on the baseball field, obviously throwing, and also he talks about the kind of intangible skills or the softer skills that we'll maybe talk about in terms of his toughness, his intelligence, and his heart that transfers from one sport to another.
I think that's really interesting. What are the things that you can transfer backwards and forwards across those different sports? So digging in a little bit with his brother Reed again, he talks about the relationship that he has with his brother. He says, we're both super competitive. We work really hard at things, and when we set our minds to something, we will accomplish it. I'm so proud of him for walking on to play baseball at Baylor. His goal was to earn a scholarship and to help lead his team to the College World Series. And that's what he did. Funny thing is, if you'd asked either one of us our dream when we were growing up, neither of us would have mentioned anything about football. Again, really, really interesting, that kind of, coming late to life to that sport.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's for some sports, it's going to be too late if you just start in high school. But if you've got a well-rounded kind of athletic background, then I think you can transfer those skills. We don't need to go too much into kind of that specialization path today. But it's good for people to know that, it's not too late. You can be one of the greatest quarterbacks of all time, and you started in high school and didn't become a starter in high school until I think his junior and senior year. So he wasn't even prolific as a high school player early in his career.
Yeah, that journey is something that's continuous. So digging in a little bit into his sort of his life philosophy and the sort of the mindset that he tries to carry forward with him, Brees says, my goal has always been to take a negative and turn it into a positive. I want to be a problem solver, not a problem creator. The glass is always half full for me. Make the best of every situation. He goes on to say, many people would define the good life as one that's free of pain and hardship and heartache. But I've learned that adversity is actually an opportunity. It's a gift. Though it may not look like it in the moment. The difficulties life throws at you can be a doorway to something better, something you hadn't even dreamed was possible. This is really interesting, and I'm excited to see what you bring up with this idea of adversity playing a role in the development of athletes.
Yeah, I want to take actually a step back to the optimism part. I think we often hear that kind of contradiction between optimism and pessimism as more of a personality trait. It really probably is that sliding scale. You're never optimistic in all areas or pessimistic in all areas. You're probably somewhere on a scale. And I think there is a personality foundation to optimism, but it is also something that you can work through and that you can train. And I've come across enough athletes that you can shift them along that scale, especially if they're in the more pessimistic side. Ultimately, we do want them to view and think about, what are the opportunities, not focus on all the negatives. And again, when we have that lens through which we see life, I think it then impacts obviously our self-talk, it impacts our confidence, it impacts our habits, our behaviors. So I think having an optimistic mindset is a great starter. And I think it's something that we can improve on and instill in athletes.
I think for me, the thing that is really important when you think about this idea of positive and negative is it's very easy to see the negative stuff. It doesn't really take a lot of effort to put yourself in the mindset to notice the negative things. They're kind of very obvious and tend to steal a lot of our attention. When it comes to either seeing things positively or taking those negatives and trying to turn them into positives, for me, that's something that's a very, very active approach, something that you can't just be a passenger on that ride for, something that you've got to try and deliberately do. I love the idea of, again, he talks about this idea of being a problem solver, not a problem creator. Again, solving problems, if you've ever sat down with a paper and a pencil and tried to work out a math problem, is an active process. It involves effort, it involves intention, and it involves a kind of a deliberate process to go about that thing. So it sounds very much like this is something that's going to set him up in the long run to deal with a lot of adversity, which is part and parcel of sports. And naturally, when we talk about adversity and we're talking about athletes and we're talking particularly about football and people that are, smashing themselves together from a couple of yards away, we're going to be dealing with injury. And of course, no exception. Has an ACL injury in high school. And kind of following that injury, finds himself in church. So throughout the book, there is a thread of spirituality and religion that plays an important role in his life, and we can certainly unpack that a little bit. But he's talking about a moment when he's in church kind of after that injury. I didn't see a vision, and lightning bolts didn't shoot out of the ceiling. I didn't walk forward at the end of service either. But there was something going on inside of me, something I can only explain as God moving in. Calmness came over my life because I finally understood that God had a plan for me. He was in control. I still approached every day with determination, and I tried to use the gifts and talents he'd given me to be the best I could at everything. But in the end, I knew it wasn't about my striving and clawing my way to the top. I knew God would take care of me, and I knew I had to trust whatever path he led me down was the path I was meant to be on. So we didn't necessarily see religion discussed in the past with Andre Agassi or with Lindsey Vonn, but what role do you see kind of religion playing or spirituality playing for athletes throughout the development and their performance?
Well, I think it's inevitable that we're going to come across athletes and performers that have a strong religious background. And for me, religion is a way to view life. It's a framework through which we see the circumstances that we experience.
Yeah, I think you've really brought up a nice idea, that idea of a framework. The words that jump out to me is this idea of a mental model, a sort of a sense-making apparatus, as it were. So when something happens, when you use that mental model or that framework or that lens to view it from, it's obviously going to be interpreted and perceived in different ways. And certainly this is something that, he continues to have throughout his whole career and I'm assuming continues on throughout his whole life. So we've got that idea, that notion of his injury and that ACL. So he's going into his senior year of high school and he's coming off of his ACL injury. Brees wasn't necessarily getting a lot of college prospects. There wasn't a ton of people looking at him, but he did get offers from Purdue and the University of Kentucky. So 6 months after my surgery, I was fully healed and once again starting as quarterback. Because of the weights and rigorous training, I now weighed 195 pounds. I gained 25 pounds of muscle. So I was physically much stronger. But for me, the real difference wasn't in my body, but in my head and my heart. I had a new sense of confidence because I knew I'd worked hard to fight through the injury. I pushed myself past the limits I previously thought I could not go beyond. I was physically, mentally, and spiritually tougher because of what I've endured in order to get to that point. Man, that's a powerful paragraph there. I'm gonna leave that as an open question and let you deal with what you want to deal with there.
Yeah, I think we've seen it with Lindsey Vonn and Andre Agassi too. I think when they've been at their best, they've been physically at their best too. I think to separate the physical, the mind and the body is an impossible thing to do. So I think when we're physically at our best, mentally we're going to be at our best. And that also applies to mental health. We know there's a strong connection between physical fitness and mental health. So it's inevitable. He's worked through a difficult injury. He's persevered through something which again fits to kind of his framework of what's important. And he's feeling physically better than ever. So of course, mentally, confidence-wise, he's at his best.
So moving from the high school realm, and he's gone through this injury, hasn't had a lot of interest from colleges, but he does end up at I can't remember if it's the University of Purdue or Purdue University in Indiana. So playing against Notre Dame, has a bad game against them, and he goes on to say, I realized I could focus on my mistakes and feel sorry for myself, or I could learn from those mistakes and use them as motivation to come back stronger. Under pressure, I would fold and I would disappear. I would show everyone that when bad things happen, you fight. I wanted to prove to my team that they could count on me, and I was the guy who could lead them. So, bad performances are going to happen, whatever the performance realm is, whether that's the athletic realm, whether that's the business realm, whether that's the arts and music and acting and all of those kind of things. Dealing with mistakes, coming back stronger. How do we do that, Duncan?
I mean, what you're hearing here, it's how are you going to approach any given situation? I think we can map on the optimistic mindset. When I make a mistake, do I feel sorry for myself, or do I challenge myself to learn from it and come back stronger? If I'm under pressure, do I fold, or do I show everybody my confidence and my ability? It is, how do you want to map on and how do you view yourself? And for me, I always, with athletes, kind of talk about this idea of internal narrative. What is the narrative that you're telling yourself around your performance? You can tell yourself that kind of victim, oh my God, I feel sorry for myself, it's all my fault, nothing goes well for me. You can go down that path, or you can really, to the extreme, you might say a warrior mindset. Yeah, this happened to me, I'm going to fight back, I'm going to show everybody, I'm going to dominate, I'm going to make things right, I'm going to problem solve. Which kind of mindset do you want? And again, it's the mapping on the optimism, it's understanding when adversity comes, how am I going to show up? There's so much there. And I think for athletes, you talked about a mental model, is what is that mental model? When you say it out loud, what sounds best for you? Do you like being the victim, or do you want to be the warrior?
Absolutely. The thing that sort of stands out to me here is when we fail and we want to feel sorry for ourselves, sometimes we do that kind of post-event, right, after the things happened. But I think certainly what football and other sports and other performances lend themselves are little moments of reflection within a game. So anyone who's watched an American football game, particularly on TV, knows it takes a long time, and you know that there's going to be gaps in there, usually for advertising. But there's opportunities to kind of reflect, and in those moments, it's a really good opportunity for you as a performer to kind of just take stock and think about, okay, well, if things aren't going the way that I want them to go right now, what are the little tweaks that I can sort of make in order to try and make this immediate performance more in line with what I want? So coming from playing one powerhouse, he gets the opportunity to play against another college football powerhouse in the Ohio State University under the weight of the Big Ten Championship. Finally, defensive end Warren Ike Moore came up to me. He was a senior too, and a guy who really didn't get a lot of playing time. But he was well respected, a quiet leader on the team. He put his arm around me and said something I'll never forget. You broke it, now go out and fix it. For some reason that made sense. It had been my mistake, but I'd had time to make up for that mistake. Instead of kicking myself or replaying the interception, I focused on the task at hand. One thing you can learn quickly is that great quarterbacks must have short-term memories when it comes to things like this. Good or bad, you have to be able to finish a play, push it aside, and move on to the next one. You can never let a play from the past affect the present. Your job is to play in the moment. Huge question here, Duncan. How do you play in the present moment?
Yeah, we hear that. I don't think it matters if you're an athlete, a coach, or a performer. It is about being in the present moment. That's the only thing that really exists for us. It's how we're going to be right now in this moment. I use the analogy of a time machine. We can't take our body back in time or into the future, but we love to do that with our mind. We love to think about, oh my God, what just happened? We also like to project into the future. And when projecting into the future, we often get anxiety. So how do we play in the moment? I think you've given a really good breakdown in the last couple of episodes when you kind of talked about attentional space and what are the things we're going to focus on? What is the task that's kind of right in front of us? What's the most important thing to focus on in that moment? I don't know so much it's about pushing things aside. I think it's about being able to switch our attentional focus onto the task. Now, you have to understand what that task is and be crystal clear, because performance can involve lots of different tasks, and you have to have the ability to switch. So it's not so much that I'm not going to get distracted. It's just when I get distracted, how do I bring my attention back to the present moment and focus on the task at hand? So understand the task, recognize when you get distracted, and switch your focus back onto it.
So when he's coming out of college, he's drafted by the Chargers with their first pick in the second round in 2001. I hopped on a plane to San Diego to meet with head coach Mike Riley and answer questions from the media. As I tried to wrap my brain around my new reality, I realized something. I could get stuck in disappointment because I hadn't gone in the first round like I'd envisioned, or I could be thankful I'd landed in the right place. Sometimes it's not how you get to your destination that's most important. The key is ending up in the right place, on the right team, in the right situation, with the right opportunity. I felt like God had put me in San Diego for a reason. A new adventure was about to begin. So one of the things that seems to sort of be a central theme through here, we talked about positivity, but I think gratitude's an interesting concept here. Do you want to talk a little bit about gratitude for us?
Yeah, I think, he talks about being thankful. He could choose to focus on the disappointment, or he could be thankful. He could have gratitude for where he has landed. And I think, again, what is that choice that you're going to make when you're in that kind of fork in the road in your own head?
I think the idea of gratitude can be a little bit off-putting for some people because it can be quite a reflective thing, and I feel like I've got to sit down and write down everything that I'm grateful for, and it's kind of journaling, a lot of introspection and sort of self-reflection. And I think, like anything, it's actually easier to break it up into little tangible chunks, and you could take a moment right now and just pause and reflect and think, okay, in this moment, what am I grateful for? So here he's talking a little bit about Doug Flutie. Doug Flutie was a mentor to me. He did so much for my career and my development as a young player. I loved the way he played the game, with a fire and a passion to win like I'd never seen before. I'm sure that's why he played professional football for so long, over 20 years in 3 different leagues. We were friends then, and we are friends to this day. He really cared about me as a person and as a player. I don't think he saw me as a threat. When I became a Charger, I wanted to help Doug and the rest of the team. My goal was to work my tail off and play as well as I could. And if I was good enough to play, great. If I wasn't good enough, then I wouldn't play. I just wanted to play my best. And I think Doug respected that. And he goes on to say, talking about Doug revealing something early in his experience, I've learned to never take myself out of a game and never let someone else take you out of a game. Do whatever you can, but if you get hurt, fight through whatever you can. Never give your backup the opportunity to see the field, because you might not get back out there again, which is an interesting thing to be saying essentially to your backup, right?
Yeah, we kind of hit that juxtaposition almost. I think what's really interesting is that he goes into a situation, he's been drafted, first draft of the second round, first pick of the second round, I should say. They haven't established a veteran quarterback. Instead of feeling threatened, Doug Flutie mentors him and supports him. And I think that's incredibly empowering. And you see that kind of then resonate with Drew Brees, who says, if I'm not good enough to play, then I don't deserve to play. But I think a lot of people, if I get drafted in the second round, well, I deserve to play. I should be given. And it's like, no, I'm going to work hard. And if I deserve to play, great. And if I don't, then I'm going to support Doug and the rest of the team.
The idea of kind of collaborating and helping each other get to where you want to go. That's a very real and often overlooked thing. There's the sort of the saying, as it were, if you want to go somewhere fast, go by yourself. If you want to go far, go with others. And I think there's a lot to be said with that, particularly someone that's coming into a system that wants to potentially in the future, get where they are, but has a realistic understanding of where they are sort of in the scheme of things, not in a pecking order, but what they've got to contribute. And Drew Brees very much sees that as, I'm going to contribute hard work and cooperation and try and drive myself. And if I win a starting position, that's great. If I don't, I'm just going to be here and continue to push things through. So, again, adversity rears its ugly head, which seems to be a theme as well, adversity and digging himself out of it. So here's a pretty low point in his career here. He says, but in 2003, things didn't work out as I planned. Looking back, I can see how the adversity of that season helped me prepare for better things down the road, but it was excruciating at the time. Do you want to paint a little bit around this picture, Duncan?
Yeah, I mean, I think we have to validate people's feelings. When things are tough, and it's okay for people to be upset, and it's okay for people to go through hard things. The reality is that it's not always going to stay hard, and as he said, like, at the time you don't always know it. You can't really connect the dots until you look backwards in life, and once you kind of reflect, then you can connect the dots. But in the moment, if you get a serious injury, or you're cut from a team, or you mess up a performance on the stage, it is going to hurt, it is going to sting, and you have to realize that's part of high performance.
I'm going to bring in some philosophy here. I think it's Kierkegaard said, life is to be lived forwards and reflected upon backwards. Something along those lines. I've probably butchered that, but there we go. So again, 2003. Unfortunately, it ended up being a huge bust. Injuries plagued us all season long, but the real problem was our youth, inexperience, and lack of leadership. When things started to go downhill early in the season with an 0-5 start, the finger pointing began. No one wanted to admit they were at fault, so instead, players went around blaming everyone else. Cliques began forming on the team, and people would either bash the coaches or talk about other guys behind their backs. The negativity became like a disease that spread throughout our team and infected us all to the point that we were completely dysfunctional. There was so much distrust in each other and in the system that the young guys didn't know who to follow. The fact is, we were all to blame. Especially me, because it's my job as a quarterback to squash that kind of stuff the minute it rears its ugly head. But I was young and probably not equipped to handle it at the time. Still, you live and learn. Sometimes you have to go through some deep valleys in order to climb to the next mountain. So this puts us in an interesting position because we haven't had this dynamic with Agassi. We haven't had this dynamic with Lindsey Vonn. This is our first team sport athlete, but I think this might be something that we see as we continue to explore team sport athletes. What stands out to you from there, Duncan?
There's quite a few things. I mean, the first one is that lack of accountability, lack of trust, and lack of leadership. There's probably those three things that ultimately stand out. From the accountability standpoint, no one's holding the hand up. No one's saying, this is on me, I'm going to make it better. It's, like he says, finger pointing. There's a lack of trust within the team. There's a lack of trust. Communication usually breaks down, which is, not a useful thing in team sports. And as the quarterback, they really, on all teams, I would say, the quarterback is one of the leaders. And if he's too young and he's too inexperienced and he's not leading, kind of nipping some of these things in the butt early on, then there's going to be a problem. But as he said, sometimes leadership, you have to learn it. You have to learn it through experience. There's very few people that would just step into that team and be a great leader from the start. So you have to go through some things. You have to figure out sometimes what doesn't work to then figure out what works. And it's like, they had a terrible season. So like, well, what are our lessons? What are we going to take away that makes us better? But for me, the accountability, trust, and leadership are the big three things that stand out.
Mm-hmm. So going through these struggles and seeing himself as a leader, and the quarterback is not only symbolically a leader, but is also usually a captain or someone that's in that sort of formal leadership role. He starts to talk about his kind of his own experience here. I began putting intense pressure on myself. I desperately wanted to turn things around with this game. I knew I needed to relax and just play, but I couldn't loosen up. This led to forced throws, and I played terrible for the first 3 quarters. So we've got this kind of this dysfunction on the team, and this negativity that's spreading through. Obviously, it probably starts on the field, has a big impact off the field, but then comes back onto the field here and has an impact on how he plays the game. Where do you feel like we've seen this previously?
Well, we've definitely seen it in episode 1 with Andre Agassi when he talked about that concept of pressing and trying to make things happen as opposed to letting the game flow and being in the moment that we've already talked about. Ultimately, pressure will do that. And he's taken a lot on himself to try and fix this whole scenario of the team. I'm going to make something happen. So when you do that, ultimately, you're probably going for reads, you're probably going for throws that you shouldn't do. And that's a horrible position to put yourself. So the emphasis to try and make things happen and to, support the team and put it on my shoulders is not necessarily wrong, but he's doing it and he recognizes, he's saying, I know I need to loosen up, but I just can't because the team is so dysfunctional in this moment. So that concept of pressing and trying to make things happen ultimately kind of causes it not to happen.
Mm-hmm. For me, the analogy I like to use with athletes is when they really want something to happen, when they're trying to force it to happen, is trying to keep a hold of a bar of soap. When a bar of soap's ever so slightly wet, if you hold it sort of gently in your hand, loosely in your hand, it sort of sits there and it's fine. But the tighter you squeeze, the more likely it is to just kind of pop out and be out of your control. Now, there's nothing wrong with wanting to take ownership here and wanting something to happen and feeling like you're the person or the kind of the figurehead in that team that can drive that stuff forward. But if you start to grasp the soap a little bit too tight, bang, it's just going to pop out. And again, if we're talking about attention, if I'm focusing on that stuff, that's drawn me away from the things that I know that are important. If we go back to what he said earlier, what's important for me in this moment? What do I need to do right now? Anything that's a deviation away from that, if you can't bring your attention back to it, it's going to have a negative impact on performance itself. He goes on to say, I was so afraid of making a mistake or making a bad throw that ironically, that's what inevitably happened. When you think negative thoughts, negative things usually happen. On the flip side, when you think positively and visualize success, that's usually what you get. It's amazing how that works. So a couple of different things to unpack here, Duncan. Where do you want to start?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. Just because you think positively and you visualize things positively doesn't necessarily mean that's going to happen. I could visualize myself being an NFL quarterback, and I promise you that's never going to happen. But I think if I take, what are the positives or what are the potential outcomes versus what are the potential drawbacks? I think focusing on mistakes and worrying about what could happen, again, takes up our attentional space in terms of taking it away from the task. I think thinking positively and visualizing positively, I don't think there's any drawback.
It's the first sentence. I was so afraid of making a mistake or a bad throw that ironically, that's what inevitably happened. There's this notion called ironic processing, which is the more you try and not think about something, the more likely you are to be thinking about that thing. So the classic example is, don't think of a pink elephant, right? And what's the first thing that immediately pops into your mind? It's a pink elephant. You're trying not to think about that, and that's the thing that comes into your space. So I think you've done a really nice job there of laying out hey, what do I want to be doing right now? The thinking positively and visualizing success, I think those are two tools that help direct that focus back to what it is that I want to be doing, as opposed to the pink elephant, the thing that I don't want to be doing. Because at the end of the day, the things that you don't want to be doing in that moment, or you don't want to happen in that moment, those are absolutely infinite, right? But what are the one or two keys, the things that are really, really important for us in that moment? the more you can think positively about those things happening and get a clear picture in your mind, that idea of visualization, seeing those things happen, it's going to be easier for you to line your behaviors up for that. So we're moving into a kind of a period of flux for him, where we're starting to see him go in and out of the San Diego, the Chargers starting lineup, and particularly after a bad game in Chicago. I was fighting back tears. I felt lost. Suddenly something came over me, sort of a courageous feeling. I stepped back and looked him, his mentor, dead in the eyes. With my chin still quivering a bit, I choked out, "I'm going to be a great player in this league someday." It was a kind of funny thing to say at the moment after such a miserable performance, but my hope was returning. I knew the kind of person I was. I knew I was capable of playing well. Something inside me was telling me I was not going to go out like that. I'd gotten this far. I was not about to give up now. Greg looked at me and noticed there was a mist in his eyes too. "I know you are." Hugely, hugely powerful. I think the emotion kind of comes through in the writing here. But, you know, a little bit of soul searching here, a little bit of digging for him. What was it that you took from that?
For me, he has a real clear sense of his identity, of who he is as a person. I think he's still battling the idea of how good he is as a football player. I don't think he has the confidence and security in that piece of his identity. But it sounds like, and you actually hear it throughout the book, that he is very clear with regards to who he is as a person. And I think that gives him that kind of solid grounding to build on. Once you have that clarity that it's not all about football, I know what kind of person I am, then the other piece, the football piece, can come along. And I think with Agassi in particular, we saw that inability to really have a strong sense of personal identity. That's what he struggled with. He knew his kind of tennis game, but the personal identity struggle, I think, is probably opposite for Brees in this situation.
We've talked in previous episodes about that idea of being a tennis player, a football player, or a skier, or a golfer. Again, we're seeing this real, the kind of the essence of you are a person that plays this, you know, kind of knowing who you are, having that clarity in who you are as a person has a positive impact on who you are as a player. And I think it seems to me one of the threads is he's kind of been a little bit of an underdog in all of the situations that he's been in. You know, his high school injury, not getting a lot of offers, getting into college, getting through college and not getting drafted where he wants to be because of his height and his stature, kind of, you know, working through all of these different elements. Now, we talked about the idea of being in flux, particularly after this game. With any flux, you're going to be starting, but you're also going to be spending time riding the pine, as it were, on the bench. So naturally, any high performer is going to spend some time here, whether that's through injury or poor performance. I wanted to use this obstacle to help me become a better player, a better man. The truth is, you don't learn much from winning, but losing can make you a lot stronger. Some say experience is what you gain when you don't get what you want. In that case, I was gaining a lot of experience on the bench. I can look back on that time now and say it was exactly what I needed. Not always the easiest thing to see in the moment.
No, it's not. It's not necessarily what you want, but sometimes it's what you need. And we've talked about that with feedback. And I think for him, that's absolutely, you know, apparent here. And I love that idea of some say experience is what you gain when you don't get what you want. And that's reality. I don't think we reflect too much on our successes. We don't necessarily take those lessons. But I think reflection really comes to the fore when we have bad performances. And he's saying now, like, connecting the dots, looking backwards again, like, this was really important for me to spend some time on the bench and to really make myself a better player. But I love what he says, a better man, a better leader. I kind of take that, a better man, a man amongst men, right? And I think that's what he's kind of saying here.
Is there any advice that you'd give to someone that's maybe been put in that position of the sub or the second string? Someone that's been put in that position for the first time, that they maybe haven't had this experience of kind of going through it and being able to battle through it. Is there anything that you can suggest that someone could do or think, or kind of a process they could go through to maybe have this softer landing for themselves?
Yeah, I think ultimately what we're talking about is role clarity, that understanding that you're no longer a starter. So you're not the starting QB, you're now on the bench. So what is your role? And when those roles are sometimes forced upon you, you didn't choose to get taken out of the starting lineup, but when that has been forced upon you, usually by the coach or an injury, then I think a really useful thing to do is to wrap your head around and have some form of acceptance of, I don't necessarily like this role, but how do I excel in this role? Because if I don't excel in this role, I'll probably never get back to my other role. So I talk a lot with athletes of, hey, do you know what this new role actually involves? Like, how do you be the best bench player? I don't expect you to like it. I don't expect you to embrace it and want to be a bench player for the rest of your life. But if you're going to get back on the field, you better be the best kind of role player possible. So when you are called upon, then you're ready to go. So I think that concept of role clarity, understanding your role, and if you don't know it, either ask people who've previously been in that role, or obviously ask coaches if that's a conversation that you're happy having.
We talked a little bit about self-awareness the last time we spoke, and I think Drew Brees is a pretty good model when it comes to self-awareness and having an understanding and kind of going through that active process of reflecting. The last couple of games I had operated in a haze because of the pressure I was putting on myself. I realized I was making the game so much more complicated than it really needed to be. Before that point in my career, I felt invincible. I thought I could make every play. That meant that every time I stepped onto the field, I had to make every play. When you go into a game with that mindset, you put undue pressure on yourself and you're destined to fail. Man, there's some wisdom in there.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things I can draw on. One is that concept of expectations. I have to make every play. We've talked about that before. When I have to, I need to, I must. And again, that feeling of pressure and forcing something, that's obviously, we want to try and change that dialogue around that I have to. And also there's a simplicity. And I'm not saying that being a quarterback is simplistic, probably the far from being simplistic. But when we break it down to the individual task, it is relatively simplistic. It is taking some steps and it's throwing a ball to somebody. Again, I'm not trying to downgrade the quarterback position. I've never been a quarterback. But if I take it to a game that I'm very familiar with and I've worked a lot in, tennis, ultimately, what do you have to do? You have to hit the ball across the net and you have to get it within the lines. Now, that's how do we simplify it as much as possible? For Lindsey Vonn, it's how do I throw myself down the mountain as fast as possible? Is there a lot of technical elements to it? Of course there is. But we can get so caught up in the minutiae and the little details that we forget about actually what are the main things that we need to do. We need to throw it to the right person. We need to hand it off to the right person. But when you break it down to simplicity, then if you're already incredibly talented like he is, like, you can do simple things really, really well.
I think that's the key of a great performer in anything. Can you take something massively complicated and make it appear incredibly simple? So as with anything, any evolution within sports, is we know that there's going to be competition because more people are going to be coming into the professional system from the college game. And in 2004, he's very aware that there's going to be a little bit of a challenge for the position here. So with the knowledge that another quarterback would be vying for my position in 2004, I was looking for an advantage, a way to rise above this competition. It seemed like in the past I'd always be the one chasing someone in front of me. Now, instead of being the hunter, it would be very easy to feel like the hunted, someone coming after my job. But that was not the approach I took. I always wanted to be striving to be better, to push myself past the limits, to be willing to try new things. If I kept that attitude, I would always be the hunter. And he goes on to talk a little bit about some of the ways that he was trying to find those advantages. I didn't stop with strength training and diet. To get me to the next level, Tom referred me to a friend to start working on visualization techniques. I'm a visual person anyway, and I believe that if you can picture what success looks like, if you can put yourself in the moment, prepare for it, and play that scenario over in your mind, then when you actually get there, what you visualized can happen. You don't have to think about it, you just react because you've done it so many times in your head. So a couple of things to unpack there, Duncan. First idea of kind of potentially being hunted and not the hunter. And then we can kind of dive in a little bit into visualization, how we could use that as a separating factor.
Yeah, they often talk in sports or high performance, once you reach the top, that's not the hard bit, it's staying there. So once you become the alpha in whatever domain you're in, you can change your perspective. You're chasing something your whole life, and once you reach there, now all of a sudden you worry about everyone else coming after you. But he said that that's not what he decided to do, so there's great self-awareness there. And I think it's really important. There's very few times in life where it's like, I can't get better at anything else. So even if you are the very best in the world, how do I get better, right? We talked about Michael Jordan or Tiger Woods in his prime, or Lindsey Vonn. Like, how do I get better at what I'm doing? It doesn't matter who's coming after me, I can still improve. The concept of visualization, or imagery, as we kind of the term we often use in the sports psychology world. It's a well-proven technique. There's a lot of research to support the advantages of imagery and visualization, and being able to picture yourself doing whatever the task is successfully and doing it over and over again is an incredibly valuable tool. And it's not just about performing a certain task. It can be used to help you recover from injury. You can picture yourself, you can use visualization to imagine yourself being more confident executing a skill. So there's a lot of different ways we can use visualization, and it's not, I'd say it's not a skill that is just sport specific. Obviously, visualization and imagery can be a technique that we can use in all sorts of performance domains and in everyday life.
So, Chargers didn't trade for a quarterback in free agency when that opened up in 2004. The phone rang in the middle of my workout. Marty Schottenheimer. We've traded for Philip Rivers. Let the competition begin. It didn't matter who the new quarterback was. I wanted my boss and my team to know I was their quarterback for the future. Nobody you bring here is going to take my job. After the previous disappointing season, I was already motivated to play better, but the draft lit a fire under me and gave me even more incentive to make this my best year yet. At some point in life, every person, no matter how successful, is told he isn't talented enough, big enough, strong enough, fast enough, or smart enough. When that happens, it's easy to spend all our energy trying to prove those people wrong. We can spend our whole lives trying to debunk the naysayers. Forget all the doubters, forget all the critics. Is there satisfaction in proving them wrong? Sure, but I don't want to give those people the gratification of even dwelling on their words that long. There's a motivator much more powerful than doubt. I play in honor of those who believe in me. So that's face and challenge absolutely head on.
Yeah, I think we can also hear a contrasted approach to Lindsey Vonn. Lindsey Vonn used the doubters and used any time anyone said a negative comment about it and used that as fuel, and really talked about like that was her motivation. A lot of times, whether it was a competitor, whether it was the media, whether it was one of her coaches, she would be fueled by that. Drew Brees is really saying, well, I'm going to use that. Okay, I recognize that I can use it, but I'm going to really focus on honoring those that actually believe in me instead of focusing on the naysayers. And for me, that is a more powerful recipe and something that I would advocate a little bit more than I would for kind of Lindsey Vonn's approach.
Yeah, I feel like that's a little bit more of a sustainable fuel source, as it were. So obviously, Philip Rivers, he is a great quarterback in his own right, and obviously providing competition. But Drew Brees is named the starter, but he did have some struggles. And obviously, Philip Rivers, as any good backup would be, is breathing down his neck. It was during this time that I had a conversation with Lorenzo Neal that I'll never forget. Lorenzo was our fullback, one of the best blocking fullbacks in the league. And in my book, he deserves to be in the Hall of Fame. He told me, this is the moment you need to decide something. Are you going to be a great player in this league or a career backup? Take this challenge and turn it into motivation. I know you're going to be a Pro Bowl player. You're going to be a championship quarterback. He didn't see me as a backup. He saw me as a championship material quarterback. Sometimes when you feel like you've been beaten down so much, all you need is for someone to show that they believe in you. Again, that idea of having those people in your corner that are fighting for you, that are pushing you forward, massively underestimated.
That concept we've talked about throughout these podcasts, like nobody does it alone. And right here, he's getting a real source of motivation from a teammate he highly respects.
And that motivation has a hugely positive impact on San Diego that season. They went 12-4, so won 12, lost 4, and won the division. Made the playoffs, but lost a close one to the Jets. It was Drew Brees' best season to that point, and he won the NFL Comeback Player of the Year and also made the Pro Bowl as well, which for those of you that aren't familiar, it's kind of like an all-star game at the end of the season based on those people that perform particularly well during the season. Usually a week or two before the Super Bowl, if my memory is correct. So going into 2005, we find that one play changes a career, or in fact several careers as well. So we've got a 9-7 record in the last game of the season, and the last day of 2005, Drew Brees shreds his shoulder. He jumped into a pile for a loose ball and obviously didn't come out in a particularly good way. As I walked off the field on December 31st, 2005, my arm numb and motionless, I was staring at the one thing I feared most, that I might never wear a Chargers uniform again. So not necessarily uncharted territory for him, because he's had injury before with his ACL, but when competition is this tight, hugely, hugely impactful. injury, not just from a physical standpoint, but also from a mental standpoint. It turns out that he's torn his labrum and got rotator cuff damage. Except for my ACL tear in high school, I'd barely gone a day in my life without football. I couldn't even imagine 8 months. But I knew I couldn't. But I knew I couldn't focus on that huge obstacle right now. As it was, getting through each day was going to require a minor miracle. A good friend of mine once told me that each morning when you wake up, think about winning the day. Don't worry about a week from now or a month from now. Just think about one day at a time. If you're worried about the mountain in the distance, you might trip over the molehill right in front of you. Win the day. So really practical approach to a very difficult set of circumstances for him.
I think we've seen both in Agassiz, but certainly in Lindsey Vaughn's story, the concept of injury comes up over and over again. And I think when we're dealing with high level performance, this is inevitable. And he's had a pretty good season in 2004. Managed to be a star in 2005, but the season didn't quite go the way it wanted. He's got Philip Rivers in the background, and all of a sudden, this could be the last time he's ever played for the Chargers. So how are you then going to approach this 8 months? And it really is that concept, and it is a cliche of taking it one day at a time, but 8 months in recovery through a long injury, that is, I don't know another way you can look at it. I think that idea of winning the day is something that is very tangible, and it's something that people can take away with them.
Unfortunately, contract negotiations with the Chargers broke down. He didn't want to face the possibility of being a backup, so ends up finding a new place to live in a relocation, which is, if you close your eyes and picture Drew Brees, you probably picture him in this uniform as opposed to being in a Chargers uniform. And this is his new home in New Orleans. And for those of you that are familiar with New Orleans, obviously have had major disasters that go through there. Not a particularly affluent part of the United States to begin with, but when you experience hurricanes, and particularly bad hurricanes, you experience a lot of death and devastation and a lot of displacement for people. And there's kind of a rallying point around sports that can happen, and we've seen happen in a number of different places. And one of the things that happens after Hurricane Katrina is the kind of the rebirth of the city, which is very centrally focused on the football team, and obviously very centrally focused on Drew Brees, who's an integral part of that as the quarterback. I didn't understand it all. I didn't have it figured out, but I knew in my gut that there was an opportunity presenting itself. I was trying to rebuild my shoulder and my career. The organization was rebuilding its reputation and reestablishing itself, and the city was restoring not only the homes, but also the lives of its people. Why not do this together and lean on each other in the process? We're all going through the same struggles and battling the same doubts. The vision was starting to crystallize as Brittany and I weighed both sides. Duncan, do you want to talk a little bit about one of your favorite books?
Yeah, I love to plug it each week, that kind of 7 types of stories. And this really is the rebirth story. He's got a serious injury. He has a choice between Miami and New Orleans, and there's something calling him to New Orleans. And it's not just about the rebirth of Drew Brees as the quarterback, where a lot of people are doubting, will he ever play again? It's that simultaneously coincides with the rebirth of New Orleans after Hurricane Katrina. At the same time, you've also got Sean Payton coming in as the head coach, who'd been the offensive coordinator with the Giants. So you've got a new quarterback, you've got a new head coach, and the city is trying to kind of reestablish itself, not be a new city, but reestablish itself. And, it is that rebirth story.
I think it really goes back to that idea of positivity and kind of collectiveness and support for those people around. Something that he's emphasized a ton throughout this entire process is really hope. And I like the fact that his sort of narrative lines up with the city's narrative as well. If he ended up at some other random American football team in the US, I don't think it's kind of that development of him as a person and coming back from his injury is going to have that real powerful impact in terms of a story. So I think those two things kind of married together really sets up a wonderful narrative. So working through rehab and working through getting back to kind of physical fitness from that obviously pretty intense injury. He talks about his idea of throughout my rehab, I tackled all my goals with enthusiasm and a positive mindset. With the accomplishment of each short-term goal, I gained the confidence and strength I needed to pursue the next challenge. The fear of failure was always in the rearview mirror, chasing after me, forcing me to push myself further than I'd ever gone before. I wore my Saints shirt to rehab at the start of every week as a motivation, a reminder of how much New Orleans have invested in me. I could not let them down. So that, I guess, identity piece that's starting to come in for him with New Orleans, and really identifying with the people in the place, and certainly with the team. What impact do you think having a real strong sense of identity and tying into kind of place, what role does that have for performance?
I think the fact that New Orleans said, "You are our guy," and a little bit of kind of context, Miami had, I think, Dante Culpepper at the time, and he wasn't sure he was going to be a starter there. But the Saints were like, "You are our guy," and that solidified that identity in him. Like, this is a place that wants me. And as such, he is almost putting a bit of pressure on himself, but he's taking his really positive mindset. Like, I'm gonna kind of, you talked about investment before. I'm gonna give back because they put their trust in me, and I feel good about that. And I am gonna give everything I've got. I'm gonna get through this rehab. I'm gonna commit to my goals. I'm gonna do it with a positive mindset. There's a real positivity here, and in this moment, you're like, well, he's not gonna fail.
Moving through his first training camp, he, obviously has developed his strength back. He's back to where he needs to be as a player after a long recovery from surgery. He's got anchors and pins and all sorts of things in his arm. Gets through his training camp and starts to move into pre-season. And we start to see some tough pre-season results in this. So we needed something good to happen soon. When you've been beaten down for so long, it doesn't matter how hard you work. It can feel like the next thing around the bend is going to be another blow. Whether it's in football or in a job or a relationship or with finances, it often seems like bad things compound on each other. Pretty soon you start to wonder if you ever get out from underneath them. On the verge of a new season beginning, we were finding it difficult to believe, not just in ourselves, but in the process. So Duncan, we talk about process being hugely important when it comes to sport, performance, and indeed any other performance. How would you help when there is a little bit of doubt in the performance here?
If you're going to be in a performance domain or a high performance domain, success is not guaranteed. No one owes you anything. So I think it is about shifting that mindset and understanding that, you do have to work incredibly hard. You are going to go through tough periods, and no one owes you anything.
We heard a little bit earlier about his sort of philosophy on life, that idea of trying to find the positives. And I think when you identify those positives, it's about believing in those things. And he goes on to say, you hear a lot of players talk about believing, and there are several different layers to that. There's the surface level type of believing, where you acknowledge that something is true. Then there's the deeper kind of belief, the type that gets inside you and actually changes you. It's the kind of belief that changes your behavior, attitude, and outlook on life. And the people around you can't help but notice. The way I see it, belief isn't enough on its own. Once you know the truth, you have to act on it. He goes on to say that one of his favorite quotes is, "Your actions speak so loudly, I can't hear what you're saying." In other words, don't just say it, be it. This idea of positivity and belief, Duncan, how important is that for an athlete's confidence?
It's incredibly important. And we talk about, what can you have belief in? What are the things that you can control? Ultimately, when we tie confidence or we tie belief to a singular performance or an outcome of performance, you can't control that. But what are the things that you can believe in? What are the things that you know true in your heart? A lot of time we'll talk to athletes about values, and what are those values that you hold true to you?
We mentioned early on that the religion and faith, I think, plays a really important role in Drew Brees' life, and he does a really nice job of breaking down this idea of faith, not in the way that you'd perhaps expect it to be from a religious or a spiritual standpoint, but he actually has faith as an acrostic or an acronym. I don't actually know which is the right word. Is a tool that he can use, and it's something that he used with his team as well, to kind of point people in the right direction. So that idea of faith, F-A-I-T-H, each letter of that word, he said had particularly important meaning for him. So the way that he breaks faith down is fortitude, attitude, integrity, trust, and humility. I think most of those are pretty self-evident. Fortitude it was a little bit sort of more personal. He sees it as being kind of toughness and courage, fighting for something that is there, but you might not necessarily be able to see yet. attitude. I think that makes sense. The way that you approach life, the mindset that you bring into things, integrity, that idea of, are you going to do what you said you were going to do? Trust. A lot of people always talk about trust as being an important value for them, so I don't think we need to dive too much there. And finally, humility, the idea of teamwork and kind of being part of something, but not necessarily wanting to get the credit for that thing in the end, that glory in the end. Is there anything that stands out to you from that faith acrostic or acronym that you think is a particularly powerful tool here?
I think you summarized it really well, actually, Greg. I think the bit that I'd tie to is what we're seeing from Drew Brees now is leadership that we didn't see early in his San Diego days. Through his trials and adversity, we're now seeing him be a leader, and through his leadership, he's been able to put a mental model, and he uses faith, and he uses that, and he sells that to the team, and the team buy in. So we're seeing leadership from Drew Brees really for probably the first time.
I think we're seeing it with the opposite side to what he was experiencing in San Diego, with the kind of the clicks and the disease of negativity running through. And I think this idea of, really coming back and galvanizing and being a team in the sort of the post Hurricane Katrina hit, they get the opportunity to play at the Superdome, not the Super Bowl, the Superdome, which is their home stadium. We committed to doing everything in our power to win that first game back there, and every home game if possible. We were going to stand our ground at the Dome. No one was going to come into our house and push us around. Our offense set goals about being balanced with the run game and pass game and taking care of football. Our defense set goals for being aggressive and taking the ball away. We had team goals, individual goals, and concrete ideas about how to move forward and put our beliefs and faith into action. So it sounds very much that they've got this shared collective team identity. Again, first time we've talked about a team sport athlete. What effect does having a clear sense of identity within that team have on either the team or the individual performer?
Well, I think something that we talked about earlier was accountability. I think when we set team and individual goals, we have accountability. We can hold each other to a standard, which at times he didn't have in San Diego. But now, through his leadership, they've got accountability.
On September 25th, 2006, we were there. We were up against our division rival, the Atlanta Falcons, returning home to the Super Bowl after a 21-month hiatus. It doesn't get much better than that. The seats were filled. In fact, it was sold out months in advance, with so many people barely making ends meet financially as they worked to rebuild their homes and their lives. It was incredible how many had found a way to buy season tickets. They looked at us as a symbol of hope. Our team represented the struggles of everyone from New Orleans and that they were going through, and if we could win, then maybe they could too overcome the suffering Katrina had caused. An even stronger bond was beginning to form between the fans and the team, and it would carry us all to a place we'd only dreamed we could be. That idea of that belief that he's talked about earlier, the kind of not necessarily the doubters, the haters. I think this is really that sort of ultimate form of being pushed forward by people.
Yeah, I see it as having, for the team, having a purpose that's bigger than themselves. It's a purpose of doing it for other people, and I don't think there is a stronger purpose in life when you're doing it. And in this case, we're doing it for an entire city that's been devastated. When purpose is bigger than pain, purpose wins. Kobe Bryant gives the example of if you lay downstairs in your house and you've got a broken leg, and all of a sudden there's a fire upstairs, and your wife and kid are upstairs, you're going to find a way to get up that stairs and get your wife and kid out. It doesn't matter if you've got a broken leg, you'll push through it because your purpose is so strong, the pain doesn't matter. And I think for them as a collective, there is this real strong sense of purpose and something that's just so much bigger than football. But for the city, it is about football. It is about connecting back. It is probably about disassociation from the challenges. We're not going to worry too much about, I might not have a home to go home to, but I am going to buy a season ticket and I'm going to invest here, because I think that disassociation from probably some of the tragedy and some of the difficulties everyone went through, it was just kind of a perfect blend of the two entities coming together.
Brees talks about it that there's really no other choice. We had to keep winning because we had to keep winning because we knew what it would mean to our fans. It was our contribution of hope. And if we play the game with all the fire and passion in our hearts, we can give something to the city. The people that are still stranded in Houston, those people that were displaced out in other parts of the country, we're going to lay it all on the line. We will win this game. These people had seen enough nightmares from Katrina. They deserved our best. I think he really kind of has embraced this leadership role, and obviously the circumstances aren't ideal, but has given them the platform to feel like he can really focus and put his energy into really important games, and this being a hugely important one. And they go out there and they beat Atlanta 23-3 and take their record to 3-0. So obviously couldn't have gone any better. That's a really great result for them, and obviously the impact for the city as well. And it is a very, very successful season. That season they do go on to continue to win, and getting into the 2006 NFC Championship game, jumping forward a little bit into 2009, again seeing a lot of success. So in this period, obviously the Saints are pretty good, got a pretty good coaching staff. They've got a good quarterback. They've got a good team behind them, and they are playing really, really good football. 13-0 going into play Dallas, who are at 8-5, and then lost to Tampa and Carolina heading into the playoffs. So not necessarily in a great place going into playoffs, but kind of from a whole season thing. Season's going particularly well. Brees says this loss also identified some glaring problems that had been swept under the rug for some time. You see, as long as you're winning, you're much more apt to let the little things slide. Winning cures everything in our business. We were due for a wake-up call. There were too many little things that were beginning to catch up with us. Fundamentals and details were lacking on both sides of the ball and needed to be corrected. The idea of success papering over the cracks here a little bit.
Yeah, I love that. Isn't it amazing? They go 13-0 and then lose the last 3 games going into playoffs, and it's that wake-up call that they needed. So the timing couldn't have been better. If they lost the 3 games early in the season, they maybe wouldn't have had that wake-up call, and winning does paper over cracks. So I think sometimes the ability to reflect again, we've talked about that. People usually reflect when defeat comes or when adversity strikes, and they don't reflect through success. We paper over things when we're successful. Okay, it cures everything. But I think it's an important lesson. When things are going well, what are those lessons? What are those things that we can continue to do? It didn't happen by accident, and we continuously have to dive into every little detail of what added up to that success.
And I think that's a key word, that idea of details. So they go on to beat the Cardinals and then the Vikings in the NFC Championship game in overtime on their way to the Super Bowl. But Brees goes on to say, in football and in life, it's amazing how many big results depend on the little things. When you're experiencing success, it's easy to gloss over those details. As the playoffs loomed ahead, we knew we couldn't afford to get sloppy, so we encouraged each other to look at the goal sheets we'd filled out at the start of the season. So kind of a process that they'd gone through at the beginning, trying to get a sense of offensive and defensive goals, what were personal goals. So each player had the chance to reflect and think, okay, well, what is it that I can do better? What do I need to do to fulfill my role on this team in the best possible way? That idea, I think you've talked about role clarity. What about goal clarity?
Yeah, and they'd absolutely gone away from those. They kind of started at the beginning. They had some success. It kind of pushed them to the side. So it was really important to revisit those. And I think it again sharpens our focus on what is our goal, what is our task, and it also enhances our accountability. It's really easy if we don't have clarity around our task and we don't have accountability, then it's really easy to get distracted. So I think this process again is so fundamental. I think just setting goals for the purpose of setting goals, it's kind of a waste of time. You have to follow up with them, and you have to have it something meaningful and sharing those goals. So I think it was obviously just the timing was perfect for them. They did it just in time.
Just in time to make the Super Bowl. That's probably a really good time to make those adjustments. So going into the biggest game in their sport, obviously crowned the world champions if you win the Super Bowl. I think everyone in the world, most people in the world are familiar with the Super Bowl. Obviously a huge stage, huge pressure, lots of eyes on you. So Brees talks about before the game, Coach Payton had given us some key words of advice. Don't look at the scoreboard until the end of the game. We could come back. We simply needed to focus on each play, each series, one at a time. And it didn't matter if we were up or down, just trust the play and react. Now, great advice before the game, but they're losing at halftime. They're losing 6-10 at halftime, and they need a little bit of a momentum shift. And Sean Payton called for an onside kick to start the second half. Duncan, do you want to explain an onside kick for those people that don't know it, or do you want me to explain an onside kick?
No, I can explain. I actually remember watching this. It was such a shock for everyone because kind of routine at kickoff in an NFL game, you kind of usually just kick down to the end of the field and usually through the end of the end zone, and play starts at the 20-yard line, and that's routine. But in such a circumstance, kicking off at halftime in the Super Bowl, the reason it worked is because the element of surprise was right there. That no one else in that whole stadium thought that would happen, that they would have the guts to call that at halftime. I mean, we could obviously map it on the other ways, like if the if the Colts had recovered it, then Peyton would have looked pretty stupid. But what a gutsy call. And he had been an offensive coordinator and had been to the Super Bowl with the Giants, so he had been in that environment. But what a gutsy call to make, and that just shifted the entire feeling, the whole momentum around the game. So down at 6-10, they get the ball, recover, go down the field and score. Just a masterful bit of coaching, but what a ton of guts.
Yeah, that is really, you look either a genius or you look an absolute idiot in that moment. And for those of you that are familiar with that game, you'd know that the Saints went on to win 31-17. The Colts knew it was over, time had run out, our time had come. The Saints were the Super Bowl champions. As exhilarating as it was to win the Super Bowl, it was just as exhilarating to see the sheer joy on the faces of everyone lining the streets of downtown New Orleans. This was about so much more than football. We knew it, and the fans knew it. Finally, after 43 years, we'd accomplished something that most people had thought would never happen in New Orleans. We'd really pulled it off, and we'd done it together with the help of our fans. And that's the culmination of an incredibly successful season and a culmination of Drew Brees' book, and that's where we're going to leave it today.
So, Greg, success leaves clues. So what are your top 10 life lessons that you can take away from this book by Drew Brees?
Absolutely, some great lessons for us to learn here. The first one, embrace adversity as an opportunity. So challenges and hardships can be gateways to greater achievements and personal growth. So Drew Brees saw his severe shoulder injury as an opportunity to rebuild his career with the New Orleans Saints. He used that phrase, adversity equals opportunity. Number 2, set and pursue clear goals. Got to set specific goals to provide direction and motivation for your success. So he set the idea of, or the goal of returning to football post-injury and worked absolutely tirelessly towards it. And he reflects back on that idea. He's always been a very goal-oriented person. Number 3, cultivate a positive attitude. This is his life philosophy. A positive mindset can significantly influence outcomes and personal resilience. Even when you experience setbacks, Drew Brees maintained a positive outlook, believing in that eventual success. Might not be here right now, but it is somewhere down the line. He says attitude speaks to the very way you approach life. Value the power of visualization. So visualizing success can enhance performance and indeed your confidence. Drew Brees talks about the idea that he used visualization techniques to enhance his performance on the field. If you can picture what success looks like, then when you actually get there, what you visualized can happen. Number 5, learn from failures. Failures and setbacks are just part and parcel of the process and provide valuable learning opportunities that can lead to improvement. So Drew Brees learned from his initial struggles in the NFL to improve his game. He says you don't learn much from winning, but losing can make you a lot stronger. Number 6, maintain integrity and trust. These are 2 of his faith acronym, if you remember. Integrity and trust are foundational to successful teamwork and leadership. He emphasizes trust and integrity with him and his team for collective success. So a person with integrity does what he says he's going to do. Number 7, practice humility. Humility fosters teamwork and acknowledges the collective effort in personal success. He acknowledges the role of his teammates in his success, emphasizing teamwork over individual glory. It's amazing how much you can accomplish in life if you don't mind who gets the credit. Again, that's part of his faith acronym. Number 8, focus on the process, not just the results. This is the standard for all sports psychology. Concentrating on the process and daily improvements leads to more sustainable success. He focused on his daily improvements in training, not just winning games. Number 9, balance professional and personal life. So balancing your work life and personal life, it's crucial for your overall well-being, hugely important. And making sure that you're effective in all of these realms of performance. So Drew Brees prioritized spending time with his family even during intense training periods. Very, very difficult once you get that single-minded professional mentality. Stay resilient in the face of criticism. Resilience against criticism and doubt is key to maintaining focus and achieving your goals. So Drew Brees always remained steadfast and confident despite doubts and despite criticisms about his abilities. He says, forget all the doubters, forget all the critics. Is there satisfaction in proving them wrong? Sure, but I don't want to give those people the gratification of even dwelling on their words that long.
That's a great top 10, Greg. Now we've talked about that concept of addition by subtraction. So what are the top 10 things that we can avoid from Drew Brees' story?
First of all, avoid dwelling on past mistakes. So important to look at them, but focusing excessively on these past errors can hinder your present performance and your growth. You've got to learn to be able to move past these mistakes quickly to focus on your current game. Number 2, avoiding negative thinking. Negative thoughts can often lead to negative outcomes, and that impacts your performance. So realizing that your fear of making mistakes can often lead to performance. When you think negative thoughts, negative things usually happen. Number 3, avoid overlooking the small details. Neglecting the small details can lead to larger issues and setbacks. So Drew Brees acknowledged that ignoring the small issues in the team dynamics led to bigger problems. And when he really wanted to refocus and improve the performance of the team, it was about getting back to those little details again. Number 4, avoid rushing recovery or progress. So rushing through your recovery or progress can lead to setbacks or incomplete healing. So we're talking particularly about returning from injury here, trying to rush through that process. So Drew Brees did a great job of balancing the urgency of returning to football with the necessity of proper healing, not sacrificing one for the other. Number 5, avoiding complacency after success. Success can often lead to complacency, which hinders your continual growth and achievement. Don't relax too much after achieving success. You want to win consistently and try and push forward and really, really try and fight that tendency with everything in you. Number 6, avoid ignoring constructive criticism. That is essential for growth and improvement, taking information from others and applying it. So Drew Brees was really good at taking advice from his coach to focus more on the process than solely on winning. Number 7, avoid letting fear of failure overwhelm you. This is a really easy thing to do. Excessive fear of failure can really paralyze your decision making and hinder your performance. You must be able to relax and still compete aggressively. Number 8, avoid isolating yourself during difficult times. Isolating yourself during difficult challenges can prevent you from receiving the support and perspective that you need to move on and push through what your difficult time is. This is where you need team unity and support, particularly during the tough moments. Drew Brees, he talks about the idea of we'll find it difficult to believe, not just in ourselves, but in the process. Continue to push through and use the social support around you. Avoid underestimating the importance of preparation. Inadequate preparation can lead to underperformance and simply missed opportunities. Make sure that you're thoroughly working through your preparation for each game, each moment, each performance. And finally, number 10, avoid losing sight of personal values. Success and pressure can lead to the compromising of your personal values and priorities. It's very important to keep those values and priorities central to everything that you do. Drew Brees talks about, my job is important to me, but I never wanted to compromise the time I spend with my family. That's his value. That's his priority. That's what he uses to drive forward his performance. All that remains to be said is to thank you very much for joining us today. Hopefully you've learned a lot from the life and times of Drew Brees. I know I have, Duncan, I know you have too. For those of you that are interested in reading the entire book, you can click the link below in the show notes to access the ability to purchase that. As always, if you did enjoy what we did here today, please make sure that you click like and subscribe. And we look forward to spending more time with you as we continue to unpack the mindsets of performers.